Foreign Minister Szijjártó, welcome to WION's Straight Talk. You know, Hungary has recently played such a vital role in evacuating Indian students from Ukraine. You worked closely with the Indian embassy in Budapest, and India even sent an envoy or a minister to Hungary as well. What other political engagements or coordination has been happening between India and Hungary since?
Look, we really do respect India. We really do respect your Prime Minister. We really do respect the patriotic approach your government is representing. We have a similarly patriotic government in Hungary. We do consider our national interest as number one. That's why we do build our bilateral cooperations and relationships on mutual respect and mutual trust. We never feel like interfering into domestic issues of other countries. We leave it to the given country and the citizens of that given country to decide how to accommodate their own lives. And based on this respect, India and Hungary was pretty successful in building up a effective bilateral relationship. And one of the impacts of that was that when your Indian students got in trouble, basically, 20,000 of your students in the Ukraine, then Minister Jaishankar has reached out to me and asked me whether we can help. I said, oh, my friend, of course. So your Prime Minister has sent your Minister of Gas and Oil to Budapest to coordinate things from there. We have helped more than 7,000 Indian students to fly back to India from Hungary. Around 40, 50 aircrafts have been sent by your government to Hungary, which aircrafts have delivered your students back. And I think that there will be a very, very important aspect of our cooperation in the future, because we have offered these Indian students who had to cut their studies in Ukraine, that we would be happy to enroll them on our own universities. And since most of your students are studying pharmaceutical science, medical science in Ukraine, our universities of medical science would be very happy to take them, to enroll them. So a little bit more than 1,000 of your students have shown interest. But of course, first I wanted to go back to India to be among peaceful and safe circumstances after the bad experience or the sad experience in Ukraine. And once they are ready to come back, then they can continue their studies on the Hungarian universities.
Very interesting. You know, we're 1 month into this war with Ukraine, and it's been impacting everyone, and now we know that it's going to be impacting the entire world, but nowhere more than Europe, and perhaps your country as well. Can you talk about that?
Sure. When there's war in your neighborhood, that poses a direct security threat on your country. So every minute which is being spent with and by the war in Ukraine puts a security hazard on Hungary, because it's in our neighborhood. It's in our neighborhood. And in this regard, the number one task of the Hungarian government is to guarantee the security of Hungary and the Hungarian people, and to guarantee that Hungary is not becoming a party to the conflict. Hungary will not be involved in the war. That's the major goal of ours. So that's why we have made some decisions which are there to serve the security interest of Hungary and the Hungarian people. These decisions and measures of ours are being attacked and criticized pretty severely, because we decided not to send troops to the war, not to send weapons, and we do not allow weapon transit through Hungary. Because if we had decided in favor of any of these three, we would have put an enormous security risk on Hungary and on the Hungarian people. And this is something that we definitely do not want. For us, the number one issue is guaranteeing the safety and the security of Hungary and the Hungarian people. But the fact that we don't do any of these three, and the fact that we do not allow the weapon transit through Hungary either, we have created a very safe environment for the humanitarian organizations. So, for example, the International Committee of Red Cross has established its logistics center in Hungary, from where they coordinate their humanitarian actions in Ukraine, because they can be safe in Hungary, because everybody knows that whatever crosses the border between Hungary and Ukraine does not contain any weapons, so they are not becoming targets of military operation. And of course, there will be huge impacts on the East to West cooperation in Europe, because now we are basically cutting all the aspects of cooperation between Russia and Europe. The only area which is not being touched yet, too much at least, is the delivery of energy from Russia to Europe. You know, Europe uses a lot of energy resources originating from Russia, Hungary especially. 85% of our gas supply comes from Russia, 65% of our oil supply comes from Russia. So for us, sanctions on energy is a no-go, because if there are sanctions on energy, that would put the safe supply of energy of Hungary at risk. And this is something that we cannot let happen.
It's interesting you talk about that, because German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Wednesday also made those comments. He came out and said that an imminent ban on Russian energy imports would trigger an economic recession in Germany and Europe as well. You're opposed to sanctions. President Biden recently announced that he wants to make a deal with Europe regarding natural gas. Would that maybe sway your opinion in any way?
This is not an ideological issue. This is not a philosophical issue, and this is not a political issue. This is an issue of physics and mathematics. Physics in the way that you need to have a source of gas or oil, and you need to have a pipeline. If any of these two is missing, then there's no reason to speak about adoption anymore. And it's a matter of mathematics as well. The European countries use 400 billion cubic meters of natural gas on an annual basis. 330 billion cubic meters of those are being imported. And half of the imports come from Russia, which means that around 170 billion cubic meters of gas is arriving from Russia. Now the question is whether somebody, someone, some country, some economic actor is able to offer 170 billion cubic meters of gas overnight to Europe. We have learned that President Biden made a commitment, but the news are about 15 billion cubic meters. Now, if you compare 170 billion to 15 billion, that's less than 10%. Good start, but a long way to go. So if Europe wants to diversify, which we applaud because we need to diversify definitely, it will take a couple of years. I would say at least 5 years. We have to be realistic, because we should not put ourselves into dreams and illusions and within 1 year we're going to make it. No, we're not going to make it. It's a matter of physics and mathematics. If the whole thing was about political communication, we could do it for tomorrow. But with political statements, you cannot heat the houses and the flats. With political statements, you cannot operate industry. So if a decision is being made today that we cut the gas deliveries from Russia to Europe, then the houses and the flats will not be heated, and industry will be not operational. So, I mean, whoever makes such kind of irresponsible statements has to be aware of the consequences. So I agree with the German federal chancellor that we need time. And once again, I want to underline, matter of mathematics, 170 billion cubic meters of gas, or some equivalent, be it renewable or whatever, but this doesn't happen overnight.
And is it a cause for concern that Russian President Vladimir Putin now says that he would sell his oil and gas, but in rubles, to, quote, unfriendly countries? Is that even possible?
Look, I mean, we have not received any kind of information about this yet. So we have a contract with Gazprom Export. Gazprom Export, the contract is about paying in euros when the deliveries are being made. So if this contract should be modified, or there will be an initiative by Gazprom Export to modify it, then we have to discuss, obviously. If we can come to an agreement, fine, but we have not received any kind of initiative yet, because as far as we understood, the Russian government, central bank, and Gazprom itself have to work on this proposal during the next week. So once we receive an initiative from Gazprom Export to modify the contract, we will look into the proposal, obviously, because once again, I want to underline that we want to avoid the situation that Hungarian people pay the price of this war. Okay? So for us, the number one issue is to ensure the safe supply of energy to Hungary. And if we need to make negotiations in favor of that, then we will make negotiations, but we will definitely not give up our interest.
The NATO Secretary General said that the alliance is likely to bolster troops along its eastern flank, deploying 4 new, quote, battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, your country, Romania, and Slovakia. Are you comfortable with that level of engagement?
Sure, we are. We are a NATO member state. So we have already established this battle group, which was purely Hungarian until now. So the change in Hungary is only that this battle group will be open for any other countries who would like to participate. So we have around a little bit more than 1,000 Hungarian troops involved, purely Hungarian and Hungarian-led battle group. And now we open the possibility of joining and participating. We understood the initiative from 5 countries, United States, Turkey, Italy, Croatia, and Montenegro, that they would be happy to send a couple hundreds of troops altogether. Now these troops would come to Hungary. They would stay on the western side of the country, not at the eastern side, which is bordering to Ukraine, on the western side. And they would make common practices and training operations on the basis of the Hungarian National Armed Forces together with the Hungarians. So we are comfortable with that. We have made a lot of investments into our armed forces to be modernized and its capacity to be increased in the recent years. So we are able to protect ourselves, and we are very happy with the international cooperation within the framework of NATO, no question. What is important for us is that the position of NATO, announced by the Secretary General, that NATO is not party to this conflict and will not be party to the conflict. And we have to, the war. And we have to make our best in order to avoid that this war goes beyond the borders of Ukraine. We are absolutely in line with this position. So we have to do our best in order to avoid this war going beyond the borders of Ukraine.
And Mr. Foreign Minister, how do you think this conflict is eventually going to end?
I don't know that there would be anyone sitting in this chair who could give you the proper answer for your question, because this is the major question, what you have just raised. And the only thing what we can do now is to hope and pray for the successful outcome of the peace talks, because in order to transform war to peace, you need to negotiate. And a couple of days after the breakout of the war, when it was about the issue of possible start of peace talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians, but they were not able to agree on the location, I have called Minister Lavrov from Russia, and I called the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, who is responsible for international cooperation, that we are ready to offer any spot of Hungary, Budapest, for the negotiations. They consider it as positively as a nice gesture, but then they decided in favor of Belarus, and then video format. So regardless where the location is, I think the most important issue is that they need to negotiate, because this is the only way to peace. And that's why we pray for the success there.